They made a big mistake when they decided to mess with me. The morning I looked weakest, standing in my underwear at 6 o'clock in the morning, watching 3 police cars come to my ranch, was really the moment I became unstoppable. You see, Patricia Thornfield thought she had finally beaten the stubborn rancher with her fake fines worth $2,400 and her army of city workers checking on me. What this neighborhood boss lady didn't know was that I used to be an army engineer who spent 20 years solving really hard problems. While she was playing neighborhood dictator, I was quietly building a case that would cost her everything. Her freedom, her stolen $180,000, and her fancy white car. Here's the best part. My 47-acre ranch was never even in her neighborhood group. My grandfather's land was here 34 years before their houses were even built. What would you do if someone tried to steal your family's land with fake papers? Tell me what you think in the comments, and I bet half of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Trust me, what happens next will make your day. Let me go back and tell you how this whole mess started. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm 42. And after 20 years working for the FA Army, all I wanted was some peace and quiet on the land my grandfather left me. This isn't some tiny yard in a neighborhood. We're talking about a 47-acre working ranch in Williamson County, Texas. It has rolling hills, really old oak trees, and stone fence posts my grandfather built by hand back in 1952. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of birds calling across the field. The faraway sounds of my neighbor's cows mixed with the smell of cedar posts and morning dew on the grass. I'd run my hand along those smooth oak gate handles Granddad put in, feeling the rough texture of limestone he dug up himself. This place had soul, you know, something you can't buy in a regular neighborhood. After a messy divorce and 20 years of military life, I was finally ready to slow down. I'd started a small digging and land clearing business. Nothing fancy, just me and some machines helping neighbors with ponds and driveways. Good, honest work that paid the bills and kept me outside. That's when I met Patricia "Patty" Thornfield. Picture this, 58 years old, perfectly styled blonde hair that probably costs more than my monthly horse feed bill, driving a white fancy SUV that she keeps so clean you could do surgery on it. Patty moved here from California about 5 years ago with her husband, some middle-level city worker, and made herself the neighborhood's looks police chief. See? Patty was the president of the neighborhood group called Sunset Ridge, a development that popped up in the late 80s, about a quarter-mile from my property line. For 8 years running, she'd been voted in without anyone running against her, mostly because nobody else wanted to deal with the headache. But Patty, she lived for this stuff. She had a reputation for going after what she called unwanted properties. And if you read between the lines, you'd notice those properties usually belonged to folks who didn't look like her. Country club crowd. The first shot fired in what would become World War III landed on my gate on a Thursday morning in March. I'm talking about an official-looking ticket printed on fancy paper. Breaking Rule 4.73. Ugly farm equipment. Attached were color photographs of my grandfather's 1962 Ford tractor, a machine that still ran like a Swiss watch and had more character than Patty's entire neighborhood. The fine? $150, going up $50 per day until the problem was fixed. The contact information led straight to Patricia Thornfield, building rules officer. Now I'm a reasonable man. My first thought wasn't to go to war. It was to pick up the phone and politely explain the situation. "Ma'am," I said when she answered, "I think there's been some kind of mistake here." "The mistake," she snapped back, "is thinking you can run a junkyard next to our community." Before I could explain that I wasn't part of her community, legally speaking, she hung up. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with someone interested in reasonable conversation. A week later, ticket number 2 arrived. Breaking Rule 2.11. Farm. Animals. The photograph showed my 3 horses, Ranger, Belle, and Dakota, eating peacefully in a field where horses had eaten for 70 years. The fine jumped to $300, and this time there was a threat. Legal action and police will follow if you don't follow the rules. I sat there on my porch holding that ticket while the evening breeze carried the smell of honeysuckle and the sound of nightbirds starting their songs. This woman was basically declaring war on everything my family had built here. The problem was Patty Thornfield had no idea who she was messing with. She saw a lonely rancher she could bully into giving up. What she didn't see was a man with 2 decades of military problem-solving training, an engineering degree, and absolutely zero tolerance for bullies. Time to teach Mrs. Thornfield about the difference between having authority and having power. But Patty wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. Ticket number 3 arrived on a Monday. Breaking Rule 8.4. Ugly buildings. This time she'd photographed my grandfather's hand-built barn from 1954. A building that had survived 7 decades of Texas storms and still stood straighter than most of the big houses in her neighborhood. Then came Ticket 4. Breaking Rule 5.17. Wrong signs. My crime? A simple wooden sign at my gate that read Morrison Land Clearing, licensed and insured, in simple black letters. The same sign that had been there for 3 years without a single complaint. I started noticing that white fancy car driving past my property every morning around 7 o'clock and every evening around 6 o'clock. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Windows down, phone in hand, taking pictures like some kind of neighborhood spy. One morning, I caught her actually measuring my fence line with a tape measure, wearing designer jeans and hiking boots that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. That's when I decided it was time to do what I should have done from the beginning. Actual research. The next morning, I drove down to the Williamson County office building and pulled every property record, map, and deed going back to 1950. Here's what I found, and this is something every property owner needs to know. You can't force property into a neighborhood group after the fact. Period. The law is crystal clear on this. My land was given to my grandfather in 1952. The Sunset Ridge Neighborhood Group was formed in 1987, 35 years later. According to the original neighborhood maps, my property was specifically left out of their boundaries. In legal terms, Patty had about as much authority over my land as she did over the moon. Armed with a folder full of papers, I called Mrs. Thornfield. Again. This time I was ready. Mrs. Thornfield, this is Jake Morrison. I have the original maps right here from the county office, and I think we need to clear up this misunderstanding. I don't care what your little papers say, she interrupted. This neighborhood has standards, and you're bringing down everyone's property values with that ugly property of yours. Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not in your neighborhood, and not in your group. My property was here 3 decades before your development. We'll see about that. She snapped and hung up again. The woman had the people's skills of a cactus, but I had to admit she was stubborn. The next morning, I discovered just how stubborn. Walking out to feed the horses, I noticed fresh survey stakes driven into my property, bright orange plastic markers with red ribbon tied to them. Someone had spray-painted red marks on my oak trees, marking what looked like a new boundary line that conveniently included about 5 acres of my land within the neighborhood group territory. I followed the trail of stakes and paint, and it was like following breadcrumbs through a fairy tale, except this fairy tale involved property theft and a woman who clearly thought she could redraw county boundary lines with a can of spray paint. The metallic ping of those survey stakes being hammered still echoes in my head. The smell of fresh spray paint mixed with the morning air created this weird contrast. Industrial chemicals marking up God's country. Those smooth metal stakes felt cold and strange against the rough bark of trees that had been growing since before Patty was born. Here's the mini twist that changed everything. I had security cameras. After my divorce, I put in a basic security system. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep an eye on the equipment and make sure nobody was messing with the horses. Those cameras caught everything. The white fancy car arriving at 5:47 a.m., Patty stepping out with a hammer and a bag of survey stakes, and spending the next hour playing property developer on land that wasn't hers. Pulled those stakes up and stored them in my workshop as evidence. Every single one. But I left the spray paint marks on the trees. I wanted to see how far she'd push this. Turns out pretty far. 2 days later, my phone rang. Mr. Morrison, this is Deputy Rodriguez with the Williamson County Sheriff's Office. We've received a complaint about destruction of official survey markers on neighborhood group property. I need to come out and talk to you. And that, folks, is how Patty Thornfield made her first major tactical error. She just filed a false police report claiming I'd destroyed official survey markers that she'd illegally placed on my property. Hunter was about to become the hunted, and she had no idea what she'd just stepped in. When Deputy Rodriguez pulled up my driveway 30 minutes later, I was ready for him. Not ready to fight, ready to educate. There's a difference, and it's a difference. That would save my bacon and cost Patty dearly. Mr. Morrison, the deputy said, stepping out of his patrol car. We've received a complaint about destruction of neighborhood group property. Something about survey markers. Deputy, I appreciate you coming out here, I said. But before we go any further, I think you need to understand the legal situation we're dealing with. I handed him my folder, the same one I'd tried to show Patty. Property records, original maps, deed papers going back 70 years. Deputy Rodriguez was a professional, and he took his time reading through everything. Sir, he said after about 10 minutes, according to these papers, your property was never part of the neighborhood group. That's correct. And the survey markers Mrs. Thornfield claims I destroyed. They're in my workshop. She placed them on my property without permission at 5:47 a.m. last Tuesday. I've got it all on security camera. Now, here's something everyone needs to know. Filing false police reports is a crime in Texas, punishable by up to 180 days in jail. And a $2,000 fine. Deputy Rodriguez explained this to me as we walked to my workshop to examine the evidence. These aren't official survey stakes, he said, handling the orange plastic markers. These are the kind you buy at Home Depot for $20. Official boundary surveys require licensed surveyors and county approval. I showed him the security footage on my phone. There was Patty, clear as day, trespassing on my property and placing fake survey stakes. The deputy shook his head and made some notes. Mr. Morrison, it seems like you're the victim here, not the bad guy. I'll need to file a report about the false complaint, but I don't see any crime committed by you. As the deputy was leaving, he mentioned something that made me chuckle. You know, my cousin Lois needs some land cleared for a pond project. You still doing that kind of work? Tell him to call, I said. But apparently, I'm not allowed to have work equipment according to the neighborhood watch. Deputy Rodriguez laughed. That lady sure seems determined. Good luck with the situation, sir. But Patty wasn't done making my life interesting. She was just getting started on what I now realize was a planned campaign to drive me off my own land. 3 days after the deputy's visit, I got a call from a city inspector. Mr. Morrison, this is David Chen with the City Planning Department. We've received an anonymous complaint about potential rule violations on your property. I need to schedule an inspection. The timing was suspicious, but I've got nothing to hide. Come on out, I told him. How's tomorrow morning? Now, here's where Patty's husband's job at the city became relevant. Suddenly, I was getting anonymous complaints from multiple city departments. Code enforcement wanted to check my septic system. The fire department needed to verify my burn pile permits. Environmental services had questions about water runoff. It was like watching a coordinated attack unfold. And the coordination was coming from inside City Hall. But here's the thing about military training. It teaches you to prepare for everything. My property was cleaner and more rule compliant than most neighborhoods. Every permit was current. Every system was properly maintained. Every piece of equipment was legally registered and insured. Inspector Chen arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, and I could tell within 5 minutes that he was a good guy, just doing his job. He spent 2 hours going over everything with a fine-tooth comb and found exactly 0 violations. "Mr. Morrison," he said as we finished up, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and your operation is textbook perfect. Whoever filed this complaint was either mistaken or double quotes," he paused diplomatically, "or they had other motives," I finished. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "that neighborhood lady calls our office about 3 times a week. Different complaints. Same property. We're starting to see a pattern." That's when I realized I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. So, I did what any good engineer does when facing a complex problem. I gathered data. I spent the next week researching public records, and what I found made my blood boil. Patty hadn't just targeted me. Over the past 2 years, she'd filed complaints against the Ramirez family, Hispanic, 12 code enforcement calls about overcrowding in a house where 3 generations lived together. Sarah Mitchell, single mother. 8 complaints about her 15-year-old. Honda being an automotive repair business. Il Thompson, elderly Vietnam vet. 6 reports claiming his RV constituted homeless camping. The pattern was clear as day. Patty was systematically harassing anyone who didn't fit her ideal neighborhood vision, and she was using city resources to do it. But she'd made one critical error. She'd picked a fight with someone who knew how to fight back. Now, Patty decided to take her campaign online because apparently harassing me in person and through City Hall wasn't enough. She needed to recruit an army. She created a Facebook group called Concerned Citizens of Sunset Ridge and started posting photos of my property with captions that would make a tabloid journalist blush. "Dangerous heavy equipment threatens children's safety," she wrote under a picture of my backhoe parked in my own driveway. "Industrial operation destroying residential property values." Accompanied a photo of my grandfather's barn taken from the public road with a zoom lens. The woman had missed her calling as a propaganda minister. But here's where Patty made another tactical error. She underestimated the intelligence of her own neighbors. I decided to attend the next neighborhood group meeting, not as a member, because I wasn't one, but as an interested neighbor who wanted to understand what all the fuss was about. I sat quietly in the back of the community center, wearing my best jeans and a button-down shirt, taking notes, and trying to blend in. What I witnessed was like watching a one-person show titled The Patty Thornfield Experience. She dominated every discussion, cut off anyone who disagreed with her, and made one-sided decisions while the other board members just nodded along like bobbleheads. But I noticed something else. 3 of the 5 board members looked uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable, especially when Patty started her presentation about undesirable elements threatening our community standards. After the meeting, as folks were filing out, a small Asian woman in her 60s approached me. "You're the ranch owner she's been targeting," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." "Jake Morrison." I extended my hand. "Margaret Chun. I'm the neighborhood group Treasurer. She glanced around nervously. Could we talk privately sometime? There are things you should know about the financial situation. Now, that was interesting. Of course, Mrs. Chen. When works for you? How about tomorrow morning? Rosie's Diner on Main Street. 8 a.m. The next morning, over coffee and eggs, Margaret Chen changed everything. Mr. Morrison, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. I've been treasurer for 3 years, and I've been seeing things that don't add up. Patricia has been making financial decisions without board approval. And when I ask questions, she shuts me down. What kind of decisions? I asked. Large payments to consulting companies. Landscape consulting, security services, administrative fees. But when I try to see the actual contracts or invoices, she says they're confidential vendor agreements. Margaret pulled out a small notebook. Last year alone, we paid $89,000 in these consulting fees. But our actual landscaping costs should only be about $30,000. And we don't have any security services. I felt that familiar tingle you get when puzzle pieces start clicking together. Mrs. Chen, have you ever heard of a company called TC Enterprises? Her eyes widened. That's one of the companies we've been paying. How did you know? Lucky guess. What else can you tell me about the financial irregularities? For the next hour, Margaret laid out a pattern of suspicious transactions that would make an accountant weep. Shell companies with names like TC Safety Solutions and TC Management Services, billing the neighborhood group for services that were either never provided or grossly overpriced. Here's a knowledge nugget everyone needs to understand. Neighborhood groups are like mini governments, which means their financial records are public documents. Any homeowner has the right to request detailed financial statements, and the group legally cannot refuse. But Margaret revealed something even more interesting. She's done this before. At her previous neighborhood group in California, there were financial irregularities that resulted in her resignation. No charges were filed because they quietly paid back the money. I was starting to realize I wasn't dealing with just a petty tyrant. I was dealing with a serial neighborhood group fraudster who'd moved to Texas to start fresh. Meanwhile, Patty's harassment campaign was escalating. My business insurance company called to inform me they were dropping my policy due to anonymous complaints about unsafe operations and hazardous material storage. Without insurance, I couldn't operate my business. Without my business, I couldn't afford to keep the ranch. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked to check on the horses. That evening sounded different somehow. Heavier, more ominous. The familiar smell of hay and leather in the barn was now mixed with the bitter taste of financial stress. I could feel the rough wooden rails of the horse stalls under my palms, solid and real, while everything else in my life seemed to be shifting under my feet. But you know what? Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a man is having his back pushed against the wall. It clarifies things. It strips away everything except what really matters. Patty Thornfield thought she was close to victory. She thought she'd found the perfect pressure point, my livelihood, and that I'd fold like a cheap lawn chair. She was about to learn that there's a difference between a tactical retreat and surrender, and that sometimes the quiet guy in the back of the room is the most dangerous person in the building. Time to stop playing defense and start playing chess. That weekend, I did what any good engineer does when the scope of a problem becomes clear. I built a spreadsheet. Margaret had given me enough information to start digging. And what I found would have made a forensic accountant salivate. Using the Freedom of Information Act. Yes, neighborhood groups fall under public records laws. I requested 3 years of financial statements from Sunset Ridge neighborhood group. Here's another knowledge nugget for you. Any homeowner can request neighborhood group financial records, and they legally cannot refuse. They might try to stall or charge administrative fees, But public records are public records. What those records revealed was a masterclass in stealing. Over 3 years, the neighborhood group had paid $186,000 to 3 companies: TC Enterprises for landscape consulting, TC Safety Solutions for security services, and TC Management Services for administrative consulting. The invoices were professional-looking. The amount seemed reasonable when spread out over time, and the board had approved every payment, except for one small problem. All 3 companies were registered to the same address. Patricia Thornfield's address.tc stood for Thornfield Consulting. Patty had created 3 fake companies to systematically bill the neighborhood group for services that either didn't exist or were grossly inflated. The landscape consulting fees were 3 times what the actual landscaper charged. The security services were for a neighborhood that had never had security issues. The administrative consulting was Patty literally paying herself to do the job she was already elected to do for free. But it got better. I cross-referenced the business registration dates with board meeting minutes and found that Patty had created each fake company immediately after joining the neighborhood group board. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. This was premeditated. I spent Sunday afternoon researching her previous neighborhood group in California. Sure enough, TC Enterprises had operated there too, billing that group for similar consulting services until financial irregularities forced Patty's resignation. No criminal charges were filed because the group board quietly accepted repayment to avoid bad publicity. Patty Thornfield wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a serial neighborhood group fraudster who moved to Texas when California got too hot. Here's the legal reality. Stealing over $30,000 is a second-degree felony in Texas, punishable by 2 to 20 years in prison and up to $10,000 in fines. With $186,000 stolen, Patty was looking at serious time. But the civil exposure was even better. Texas allows triple damages for theft, meaning Patty could owe the neighborhood group $558,000 plus attorney fees. Add in the harassment lawsuit I was building, and we were talking about enough money to buy her white fancy car several times over. I had her dead to rights. One phone call to the district attorney, and Patty's neighborhood group reign would end in handcuffs. But that felt too easy, too quick. She'd spent months making my life hell, systematically harassing my neighbors and stealing from her community. She deserved a more educational experience. I wanted her to dig her hole deeper. I wanted the entire community to see exactly who they'd been trusting with their money and their neighborhood. And most importantly, I wanted to make sure this never happened again. Not here, not anywhere else Patty might learn. So I made a decision that my ex-wife would have called typically stubborn and my old army buddies would have recognized as tactical patience. Instead of ending this quickly, I was going to let Patty keep escalating until she hung herself with her own rope. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the victim reacting to her attacks. I was the prosecutor building an airtight case. Every move she made from here on out would just add to the evidence pile. Patty thought she was close to victory, that she'd almost driven the troublesome rancher off his land. She had no idea that her target had just become her biggest threat. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey was about to start setting traps. Time to assemble my war council. First call went to my army buddy, Tom Rodriguez. Not the deputy. Different Rodriguez. Tom had traded his combat engineer uniform for a law degree, and now specialized in civil rights cases in Austin. When I laid out the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. "Jake," he finally said, "what you're describing isn't just harassment. It's systematic civil rights violations with a clear pattern of discrimination. The fact that she's targeting minorities and veterans, That elevates this to federal territory. What? Are we talking about legally? Intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to violate civil rights, potentially RICO charges if we can prove the financial crimes are part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. Tom's voice got that edge it used to have when he was planning demolitions. Plus, she's using her position of authority to harass people based on protected characteristics. That's textbook Section 1983 violation. Here's a knowledge nugget that could save your life someday. When government officials or people acting under government authority systematically harass citizens, it becomes a federal civil rights case under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The damages can be enormous, and the defendants can be held personally liable. Next, I needed technical support. My nephew Kevin had just finished his cybersecurity degree and was looking for real-world experience. Kid was a wizard with computers and had more patience for documentation than anyone his age should. Uncle Jake, he said when I explained the situation, you need professional-grade evidence collection, not just security cameras. We're talking encrypted backups, social media monitoring, digital forensics. If this goes to court, every piece of evidence needs to be bulletproof. Within a week, Kevin had transformed my property into a surveillance fortress. Hidden cameras with night vision, audio recording, automatic cloud backup, even a system that tracked when Patty's white car passed my driveway. The kid was thorough. But the most important ally came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chun called me on a Wednesday evening, voice shaking. Mr. Morrison, I've been going through more financial records. It's worse than I thought. Much worse. We met again at Rosie's Diner, but this time Margaret brought a cardboard box full of documents. I've been secretly copying everything for months. Bank statements, vendor contracts, board resolutions. Patricia has been forging signatures on checks, approving payments without board votes, even transferring money between accounts without authorization. How much are we talking about total? Over 3 years, nearly $180,000. Margaret's hands were shaking as she poured cream into her coffee. She's been stealing from us for so long that it's become normal. The other board members just sign whatever she puts in front of them. I realized Margaret wasn't just an ally. She was a whistleblower, putting herself at considerable risk. Mrs. Chun, what you're doing takes courage. But you need to know that once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Mr. Morrison, I've been watching her destroy this community for 3 years. She's turned neighbors against each other, driven good people away, and stolen money that was supposed to make our neighborhood better. It has to stop. That's when I knew we had everything we needed. Tom came down from Austin the following weekend to review our evidence. Watching him work was like watching a master craftsman. He organized everything into timelines, cross-referenced the harassment incidents with the financial crimes, and built a case that was tighter than a submarine. This is prosecution-level work, he said, leaning back in my kitchen chair. We've got her on stealing, civil rights violations, conspiracy, fraud, false police reports, and about 6 other charges. But here's the beautiful part. We can file both criminal complaints and civil lawsuits simultaneously. What's that mean in practical terms? Criminal case puts her in prison. Civil case takes every asset she has and gives it back to the people she stole from. We're talking about complete financial destruction. But I wanted more than just punishment. I wanted prevention. Tom, what happens to prevent her from just moving to another state and doing this again? That's where the RICO charges come in. If we can prove this is an ongoing criminal enterprise, and we can, she gets flagged in a national database. No neighborhood group in America would be able to hire her without knowing her history. Meanwhile, I quietly reached out to Patty's other victims. The Ramirez family was eager to testify about years of harassment disguised as code enforcement. Sarah Mitchell had kept recordings of Patty's abusive phone calls. Bill Thompson, the Vietnam vet, had documented every false complaint filed against him. We weren't just building a case anymore. We were building a movement. The final piece came together when Kevin discovered Patty's private Facebook messages. She'd been coordinating her harassment campaign through social media, recruiting neighbors to file false complaints, and even offering to compensate people for their cooperation. "Uncle Jake," Kevin said, showing me his laptop screen. She basically documented her entire conspiracy in writing. It's like she wanted to get caught. Everything was ready. We had overwhelming evidence, multiple victims willing to testify, and a legal strategy that would end Patty's reign permanently. All we needed now was the perfect stage for her final performance. While I was building my case, Patty was losing her mind. And desperate people do desperate things. It started on a Tuesday night. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of metal grinding against metal, a sound that makes every equipment owner's blood run cold. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to my workshop, and what I found there made my hands shake with rage. Someone had sabotaged my excavator. Sugar in the gas tank, hydraulic lines cut with a knife, and for good measure, they dumped sand into the oil reservoir. $8,000 in repair costs minimum. My business was effectively shut down until I could get everything fixed. But here's the thing about Kevin's surveillance system. It caught everything. Crystal clear footage of a white fancy SUV arriving at 2:47 a.m., Patricia Thornfield stepping out with a toolbox and a bag of sugar, and spending 45 minutes systematically destroying my equipment. The woman was so focused on her sabotage that she never noticed the infrared cameras recording every move. I called Deputy Rodriguez first thing in the morning. "Deputy, I need to file a report for destruction of property, and this time I've got video evidence." When he saw the footage, his expression went from professional interest to genuine anger. "Mr. Morrison, this is a felony. Destruction of property over $2,500 is a state jail felony. And what she did here is closer to aggravated criminal mischief. What's that mean in terms of consequences? 2 years in state jail, $10,000 fine, plus repayment for damages. And now we've got her on camera committing a crime. This changes everything." But Patty wasn't done showing her true colors. 3 days later, my insurance agent called with an interesting story. "Jake, I just had the strangest conversation. A woman named Patricia Thornfield contacted our office offering to mediate your dispute if we permanently cancelled your coverage. Said she represented the community interest and could make this all go away if we just dropped you as a client." I had to laugh. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that attempting to interfere with someone's insurance coverage is insurance fraud, which is a federal crime." Then I reported the call to our fraud investigation unit. Patty had just added federal mail fraud and insurance interference to her growing list of crimes. The woman was like a one-person crime wave. Meanwhile, Kevin was monitoring her social media activity, and what he found was pure gold. Patty was running a coordination campaign through private Facebook messages, recruiting neighbors to file false complaints, and even offering to pay people's neighborhood group fees if they cooperated with her harassment campaign. "Uncle Jake, look at this," Kevin said, showing me screenshots of her messages. "She's literally paying people to lie to city inspectors, and she's documented everything in writing. The messages were like reading the playbook of a conspiracy. If everyone calls code enforcement about the same violation, they'll have to act," she wrote to one neighbor. "I'll cover your neighborhood group dues for 6 months if you file a complaint about the noise." But the most damning evidence came from a message to her husband. The insurance thing worked. His business is basically shut down now. A few more pressure points and he'll have to sell. It was conspiracy in writing with a clear intent to cause financial harm. The psychological pressure was getting to Patty too. Neighbors started reporting erratic behavior, screaming phone calls to city officials, confrontations in the grocery store, and increasingly paranoid posts on social media about outside agitators trying to destroy our community. Margaret called me with updates from board meetings. "She's losing it, Mr. Morrison. Yesterday, she accused me of being a spy working for anti-neighborhood group extremists. She's demanding that the board give her emergency powers to deal with what she calls the Jake Morrison crisis." Emergency powers? She wants authority to place immediate liens on properties, hire private security, and bypass normal board voting procedures. The other members are getting scared of her. That's when I realized Patty was about to make her biggest mistake. Yet, in her desperation to maintain control, she was going to overreach so badly that even her rubber-stamp board would have to act. Margaret confirmed my suspicions at our next coffee meeting. She's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. Topic is addressing immediate security threats to community welfare. She's planning to formalize her harassment campaign as official neighborhood group policy. The beauty of it was that Patty was about to create an official paper trail of her illegal activities. Instead of just individual harassment, she was going to make it official neighborhood group business, which would implicate the entire board in her conspiracy. "Mrs. Chen, are you prepared to record that meeting?" She nodded grimly. "I've been recording everything since our first conversation. If she's going to destroy this community, at least there'll be evidence of how it happened." Patty Thornfield was about to cross the line from individual criminal to organizational conspiracy. And she was going to do it in front of witnesses. On the record, with Margaret documenting every word. Sometimes the best strategy is just giving your enemy enough rope to hang themselves. Patty's emergency board meeting was everything I hoped it would be, and Margaret recorded every single word. According to Margaret's recording, Patty presented what she called the Morrison Threat Assessment to the board. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not kidding. Complete with aerial photos of my property, financial projections of property value decline, and a proposed action plan that would have made a Banana Republic dictator proud. "We need immediate authority to place liens on non-compliant properties," Patty announced to the stunned board. "The legal precedent is clear. Neighborhood groups have eminent domain powers that supersede individual property rights." That was completely false, by the way. Neighborhood groups have no eminent domain powers, and placing liens on properties outside your jurisdiction is theft. But the best part came when board member David Walsh asked a simple question. "Patricia, is this property actually within our neighborhood group boundaries?" "Boundaries are fluid when community welfare is at stake," she replied without missing a beat. "Legal technicalities shouldn't prevent us from protecting property values." Margaret's recording captured the uncomfortable silence that followed. Even Patty's rubber stamp board wasn't willing to endorse theft and extortion, no matter how she dressed it up. But Patty wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to find official-looking documents zip-tied to my gate. Notice of immediate lien. Sunset Ridge Neighborhood Group. According to the papers, my property was now subject to a $15,000 lien for accumulated violations and administrative fees. The document was signed by Patricia Thornfield as neighborhood group president and included a deadline: payment or property transfer, required within 30 days to avoid foreclosure proceedings. I had to hand it to her. The woman had brass. She just attempted to steal my ranch using fake legal documents. I called Tom immediately. "She did what?" he asked when I read him the lien notice. That's attempted extortion using fraudulent legal documents. In Texas, that's organized criminal activity under the RICO statute. Tom, in plain English, what does that mean? It means she just graduated from local criminal to federal offender. RICO charges carry 20 years in federal prison and complete asset forfeiture. She literally just bet her house on a bluff. But Patty's desperation was reaching truly dangerous levels. That afternoon, my daughter Emma called from college, upset and confused. Dad, someone called my dorm claiming to be from the county sheriff's office. They said you were under investigation for environmental crimes and they needed to verify my contact information for when you're arrested. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Targeting me was one thing. Involving my kid crossed every line that existed. I called Deputy Rodriguez immediately. Someone impersonated a law enforcement officer to harass my daughter at college. I want to file a formal complaint. Mr. Morrison, impersonating a peace officer is a third-degree felony in Texas. If we can prove who made that call, they're looking at serious time. Kevin's tech magic came through again. He traced the call back to Patty's home phone number. She'd been so rattled that she'd forgotten to use a different phone or block her number. We had her dead to rights. On felony impersonation of a peace officer. The final straw came that weekend. I was having dinner with Sarah Mitchell, the single mother Patty had been harassing, and her teenage son Marcus. Sarah had been helping me document the pattern of harassment, and we'd grown close during the investigation. We were sitting on my porch watching the sunset when 3 pickup trucks full of men I didn't recognize pulled up my driveway. They climbed out carrying signs that read, "Respect property values and stop the harassment." The leader, a guy in his 50s wearing a Sunset Ridge Neighborhood Group polo shirt, walked up to my porch. "Mr. Morrison, we're here representing the community. Mrs. Thornfield sent us to discuss your compliance issues." I stood up slowly and Sarah pulled Marcus behind me. "Gentlemen, you're on private property. I'm going to need you to leave." "We're not leaving until you agree to stop harassing our neighborhood group president," he said, and his buddies spread out across my yard in what was clearly a practiced intimidation formation. That's when I smiled because Kevin's cameras were recording everything, and what these gentlemen didn't know was that organized intimidation by multiple people constitutes criminal conspiracy under Texas law. "Sarah, would you mind calling Deputy Rodriguez?" I said calmly. "Tell him we have a situation that requires immediate law enforcement response." The sound of gravel crunching under multiple boots, the acrid smell of cigarette smoke and engine exhaust, the feel of my own adrenaline making my hands steady. It all took me back to situations I'd handled in the army. Except this time I had the law completely on my side. "You know what, fellas?" I said, still smiling. "Mrs. Thornfield has made a serious tactical error sending you here, because now she's not just guilty of individual crimes. She's organized a criminal conspiracy." The sirens in the distance were getting louder, and the confident expressions on their faces were starting to waver. Patty had just upgraded herself from lone criminal to conspiracy ringleader, and she'd done it with witnesses and video evidence. The annual neighborhood group meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and by then, word had gotten out that something big was brewing. The community center was packed with over 200 homeowners, the largest turnout in Sunset Ridge history. Margaret had tipped off the local newspaper, and I'd asked Deputy Rodriguez to attend as a community liaison. Patty arrived in her white fancy car, looking like she was heading to a board meeting at a big corporation. Perfect hair, designer suit, briefcase full of what I assumed were more fraudulent documents. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. I sat in the back row with my accordion file of evidence, watching her work the room like the politician she thought she was. "Tonight, we're going to address the security threats that have been plaguing our community," she announced to the crowd. It's time to take back our neighborhood. The irony was beautiful. Margaret Chen stood up as treasurer to give the financial report. And that's when things got interesting. Before we discuss new business, Margaret said, I think the community deserves transparency about where their money has been going. Patty tried to shut her down. Mrs. Chen, we have a set agenda tonight. The agenda includes the treasurer's report, Margaret replied firmly. And I have some concerning findings to share. I watched Patty's face as Margaret began projecting financial documents onto the screen. 3 years of payments to TC Enterprises, TC Safety Solutions, and TC Management Services. $180,000 in questionable transactions. Shell companies registered to Patricia Thornfield's home address. The murmur that went through the crowd was like thunder rolling across the hills. Our assessment money went to her companies. Someone shouted from the middle of the room. This is character assassination, Patty screamed, standing up and pointing at Margaret. This woman is conspiring with outside agitators to destroy our community. That's when I stood up. Mrs. Thornfield, I said calmly. My name is Jake Morrison. I think we need to talk. The room went dead silent. Everyone had heard about the problem rancher, but most had never seen me in person. You're not a member of this neighborhood group, Patty snapped. You have no right to be here. You're absolutely right, I said, pulling out my property records. I'm not a member. Never have been, never will be. But you've been harassing me for months, filing false police reports, and trying to steal my land with fraudulent liens. I walked to the front of the room, and Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward to stand beside me. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The law was literally on my side. For the past 6 months, I continued, Mrs. Thornfield has waged a systematic campaign of harassment against me and other community members. She's filed dozens of false complaints, trespassed on my property, sabotaged my equipment, and even targeted my college-aged daughter with threatening phone calls. The crowd was riveted. You could hear a pin drop. But here's what really breaks my heart, I said, looking around the room. She's stolen nearly $200,000 from this community through fake consulting companies. Money that was supposed to improve your neighborhood went into her personal bank account. Patty was frantically trying to pack up her materials. I didn't have to listen to these lies. Ma'am, I said, these aren't lies. Deputy Rodriguez, would you like to share what the sheriff's department has discovered? Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward with his own folder. Mrs. Thornfield, we have video evidence of you committing felony destruction of property, falsifying police reports, and impersonating a peace officer. We also have evidence of organized criminal activity and conspiracy. The room erupted. Angry voices demanding explanations, board members looking shocked and betrayed, and Patty standing at the front like a deer in headlights. But I wasn't done. This was my mic drop moment. Mrs. Thornfield, I said, projecting my voice over the crowd. I served 20 years in the army, protecting communities like this one. I never expected the biggest threat to come from someone who was supposed to be serving. This community. I turned to address the crowd directly. You trusted her with your money, your neighborhood, your quality of life. She repaid that trust by stealing from you and terrorizing anyone who didn't meet her standards. The newspaper reporter was frantically taking notes, and I could see phone cameras recording throughout the room. But here's what I want you to remember, I continued. This community is stronger than one person's greed and prejudice. You have good people here, like Margaret Chun, who risked everything to expose the truth. You have neighbors who care about each other. Don't let one criminal make you forget that. That's when the most beautiful thing happened. Sarah Mitchell, the single mother Patty had been harassing, stood up and started clapping. Then Bill Thompson, the Vietnam vet. Then the Ramirez family. Within seconds, the entire room was giving me a standing ovation while Patty Thornfield stood frozen at the front. Deputy Rodriguez moved toward her with handcuffs ready. "Mrs. Thornfield, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and multiple counts of filing false police reports." As they led her out in handcuffs, she turned and screamed at me. "You've destroyed everything." "No, ma'am," I replied. "I just helped your neighbors see who you really are." The community had seen the truth. Justice was being served, and healing could finally begin. 6 months later, Patricia Thornfield was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay $540,000 in restitution, triple damages under Texas theft statutes. Her husband filed for divorce and lost his city job. The white fancy car was sold at auction to help pay back the community she'd stolen from. But the real victory wasn't putting Patty behind bars. It was watching Sunset Ridge transform into the community it was always meant to be. Margaret Chen was unanimously elected as the new neighborhood group president, and her first act was implementing complete financial transparency. Monthly reports are now published online. Every expenditure requires 3 board approvals, and shell company billing is explicitly prohibited in the neighborhood group bylaws. The harassment complaint process I helped them design has become a model for other neighborhood groups across Texas. Any resident can file a formal complaint against board members with mandatory investigation and public hearings. No more secret tribunals or personal vendettas disguised as community standards. Property values actually increased after Patty's removal. Turns out that stability and trust are worth more than fear and control. Who would have thought? As for the neighbors Patty had terrorized, they're all thriving now. The Ramirez family started a landscaping business that now services half the neighborhood. Sarah Mitchell finished her nursing degree and bought a bigger house 3 streets over. Bill Thompson's RV is still in his driveway, and his neighbors now stop by regularly to hear his war stories. The best part of this whole story: I used part of the settlement money to build something that would benefit the entire community. The Sunset Ridge Community Workshop. It's a 2,400 square foot building on the back corner of my property, equipped with everything from basic hand tools to welding equipment. Every Saturday morning, I teach neighbors how to use the machinery safely. Veterans get priority access, and there's a whole program for teaching kids basic mechanical skills. We've built playground equipment for the elementary school, repaired dozens of neighbors' vehicles, and even constructed a gazebo for the community center. The workshop has become the heart of something Patty never understood: real community cooperation. The monthly Fix-It clinic draws people from 3 counties over. Elderly residents bring broken appliances. Young families learn home repair skills. And teenagers discover that working with their hands is more satisfying than staring at screens. Last month, we repaired 47 items that would have otherwise gone to the landfill. On a personal note, life couldn't be better. Sarah Mitchell and I got married last spring in a ceremony held right here on the ranch. Her son Marcus calls me the stepdad who fought City Hall and won, and he's become quite the mechanic himself. My daughter Emma transferred to a Texas university to be closer to our growing family. The ranch is more alive than it's been since my grandfather's time. We've got 3 horses, 2 dogs, a barn cat named Deputy after Rodriguez, and a vegetable garden that feeds half the neighborhood. But here's what I want you to remember from this whole crazy story: documentation beats confrontation every single time. I could have gone head to head with Patty from day one, but patience and evidence gathering gave me a victory that lasted. When someone tries to bully you, don't get mad. Get methodical. Also, know your rights. Property records are public documents. Neighborhood group financial statements are public documents. When government officials abuse their authority, There are federal laws designed to stop them. Knowledge is power, and power properly used can protect entire communities. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a disabled Marine in California facing a similar situation with his neighborhood group. They're trying to force him to remove his service. Dog and threatening foreclosure over fabricated violations. Sound familiar? I told him what I'm telling you. Gather evidence. Know the law. Find allies. And never let bullies win through intimidation. Sometimes the best way to protect your own property is to help others protect theirs. If you've got your own neighborhood group nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. Share your victories, your ongoing battles, and your advice for others facing similar situations. This community we've built here doesn't end with this video. And hit that subscribe button, because next week we're heading to California to help that Marine defend his home. Patty Thornfield might be behind bars, but there are plenty of other petty tyrants out there who need to learn that Americans don't back down from bullies. As my grandfather used to say, good fences make good neighbors, but good neighbors make great communities. Welcome to the neighborhood.